In the 90s, in the city of Los Angeles, a dying millionaire discovers his housekeeper kissing a photograph in the middle of the night, crying silently while whispering names he doesn't know. What's about to happen within these four walls will change two lives forever and make you understand that family doesn't always share your last name. If you stay until the end of this story, you'll discover how an act of kindness can transcend death and prove that true love knows no borders or conditions. This is a story that happened in 1995, and I guarantee you won't be able to hold back the tears. The year was 1995, and in a mansion in the exclusive neighborhood of Beverly Hills, Richard walked alone through hallways that seemed endless. At his age, this man who had built an empire from scratch now faced the cruelest illness, loneliness, accompanied by a body that was giving up little by little. The doctors had given him a few months to live, maybe a year if he was lucky, but he knew time was slipping through his fingers like sand. His weak heart beat with difficulty every morning. The chest pains woke him in the early hours, and the pills piled up on his nightstand like little reminders of his mortality. He had no children to visit him, no wife to hold his hand, no siblings to ask how he was. He had dedicated his entire life to business investments, building a fortune that now meant nothing because he had no one to share it with. The nurses he hired didn't last long. Some treated him with cold professionalism, others just did their job and left without saying goodbye. That September morning, Richard decided he needed something different. He didn't want another nurse in a white uniform with a distant attitude. He wanted someone to turn this cold house into a place where he could feel accompanied in his final days. He called an employment agency and asked for something specific. A trustworthy person, someone who could cook clean, and above all, have patience with a sick and difficult man. The woman on the phone promised to send the perfect candidate the next day. Richard hung up without much hope, thinking it would be another person who would enter and exit his life without leaving a mark. That night, while taking his medications in front of the bathroom mirror, he looked at himself closely and saw a tired man, a man who had won everything in business but lost everything in life. He wondered if anyone would cry at his funeral, if anyone would remember his name fondly, if his existence had meant anything more than numbers in a bank account. The next day, the mansion's doorbell rang exactly at 9 in the morning. Richard went down the stairs slowly, holding onto the railing because his legs no longer responded as before. He opened the door and found a woman of 36 average height with her hair tied in a simple braid and a look that conveyed something he hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine humility. She wore clean but worn clothes shoes that had walked many miles, and in her hands she held a small fabric suitcase. "Good morning, sir. My name is Valerie, and I'm here for the housekeeper job," she said with a soft, almost shy accent, lowering her gaze as if not wanting to intrude. Richard observed her in silence for a few seconds, noticing something different about her, something in her eyes that spoke of untold stories, silent sacrifices, a strength hidden behind a polite smile. "Come in, Valerie. Let's talk inside," he replied, stepping aside. They sat in the main living room, a huge space decorated with expensive furniture that looked more like a museum than a home. Richard explained the basics. He needed help with household chores, preparing his special meals for the diet he had to follow, reminding him of his medications at the right times, and above all, he needed company during the nights when the pain kept him awake. Valerie listened attentively, nodding without interrupting, showing a respect that Richard found refreshing. "Do you have experience caring for sick people?" he asked, expecting the typical response from someone exaggerating their skills to get the job. But Valerie surprised him with her honesty. "I cared for my father until his last days, sir. I know what it's like to accompany someone who suffers. I know what it's like to have patience when pain makes words come out harsher than the heart intends. I don't have certificates or degrees, but I have love for what I do." Richard felt something strange in his chest, something that wasn't physical pain but an emotion he had forgotten. "Hope. You're hired," said Richard without thinking twice, surprising himself with such a quick decision. Valerie's eyes widened in surprise and a shy smile lit up her face. "Thank you, sir. I promise you won't regret it. I'll take care of you like my own family." Those words resonated in Richard's ears in a way he didn't expect. Family. It had been so long since that word was part of his vocabulary that he had almost forgotten its meaning. He showed her the room where she would sleep, a simple but comfortable room in the east wing of the mansion, and explained the daily routine. Valerie left her suitcase, put on an apron she had brought with her, and started working immediately as if she had lived there for years. Richard watched her from the door of his study, wondering what story this woman hid who had accepted such a demanding job with so much gratitude. Something inside him told him that Valerie wasn't an ordinary employee, that there was a deep reason why she needed this job, but he decided not to ask yet. Time would teach him who the woman who had just entered his life really was. From the first day, Valerie proved that her words weren't just empty promises. She woke up before dawn. Prepared breakfast, exactly as Richard needed it. No salt, no sugar, with portions measured to the detail the doctors had indicated. But it wasn't just the food that surprised Richard, it was the way she served it. With a genuine smile, asking if he had rested well, if the pain had been tolerable during the night, if he needed anything else. It wasn't the forced courtesy of someone doing a job, it was the real affection of someone who truly cared. Richard, accustomed to the indifference of previous nurses, at first didn't know how to react to so much warmth. "Why are you so kind to me?" he asked one morning while she adjusted his pillows. Valerie looked at him with tenderness and replied, "Because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, sir, especially when going through tough times." The weeks passed and the routine became something more than work obligations. Valerie learned every detail of Richard's life. She knew exactly when his chest pains started. She knew what words comforted him when he felt down. She could tell from his look when he needed silence and when he needed company. She prepared his remedies with almost religious precision. Never forgot a dose, never mixed up a medication. But the most extraordinary thing happened in the early mornings when Richard woke up screaming in pain, when his heart seemed to want to give up, and the fear of dying alone overwhelmed him completely. In those moments, Valerie appeared at his bedroom door like a silent angel. She sat in the chair by his bed, gently took his hand and began to speak to him with a voice so calm it seemed like music. She told him stories of her childhood in a small rural town, described the sunsets over the fields, spoke of her faith that God never abandons his children. Richard had never been a religious man. He had built his life believing only in hard work and numbers. But something in Valerie's words brought him peace. "When my father was sick," she told him one of those nights, "I sat just like this and held his hand until the pain passed. He told me my company was better than any medicine, that knowing he wasn't alone gave him strength to go on another day." Richard listened in silence, with tears gathering in his eyes, realizing that for the first time in decades, someone was treating him like a human being and not like a boss or a millionaire. "Your father was very lucky to have you," murmured Richard with a broken voice. Valerie squeezed his hand tighter and replied, "I was lucky to have him. That's what family does. Mr. Richard be there when it's most needed." Those words stayed engraved in Richard's mind like an invisible tattoo. The months went on, and the relationship between Richard and Valerie transformed into something neither had planned. He stopped seeing her as his employee and began waiting for her every morning with the excitement of a child waiting for his mother. She prepared his favorite dish on Sundays, even though it wasn't in her duties. And he started asking about her day, her dreams, what made her happy. They talked for hours on the terrace, Richard sharing stories of his youthful years, how he had come to Los Angeles with nothing and built his fortune through sacrifice. And Valerie listened attentively, asking questions, showing genuine interest in his life. "Did you never marry?" she asked one afternoon while serving tea. Richard shook his head. "I was engaged once many years ago, but she left me because she said I loved my work more than her. She was right." Valerie stayed silent without judging, just nodding with understanding. Richard noticed she never talked about her own personal life, never mentioned family, never shared details about her past. One afternoon, while organizing the library shelves, Richard dared to ask, "Valerie, do you have family back home?" He saw her tense for a second, her hands stop moving, her breathing deepen. "Yes, sir," she replied in a barely audible voice without turning to look at him. "And why did you come alone to Los Angeles? Why didn't you bring your family with you?" The silence that followed was so heavy that Richard almost regretted asking. Valerie turned slowly, and for the first time since he knew her, Richard saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Because sometimes the only way to care for those you love is by distancing yourself from them, sir." Sometimes the greatest love is shown with the most painful sacrifice. She said no more, simply apologized politely and left the room, leaving Richard with more questions than answers. That night, while taking his medications before bed, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Valerie's words about the pain he had seen in her eyes, about the mystery surrounding this woman who cared for him with so much love. Something told him that behind that unbreakable dedication hid a story of sacrifice he didn't yet know. It was an October night past 11 when Richard woke up thirsty and decided to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. The doctors had told him to walk a little each day to keep circulation going, so he took advantage of these nighttime moments when the pain was more tolerable to move around the house. He went down the stairs slowly, holding the railing, feeling his knees protest with every step. The mansion was plunged into absolute silence. The kind of silence that only exists in big houses when everyone is asleep. The lights were off except for a small lamp in the hallway that Valerie always left on so he could orient himself if he needed to get up. As he passed Valerie's room, located on the first floor near the kitchen, Richard noticed a dim light filtering under the door. He thought maybe she had forgotten to turn it off before sleeping, but then he heard something that stopped him cold. A muffled sob, a contained cry that tried to be silent but in the quiet of the night was heard with heartbreaking clarity. Richard approached the door slowly, his heart pounding hard not from his illness but from genuine concern for this woman who had become more than his employee. He stood there not knowing if he should knock or respect her privacy when he heard Valerie's voice whispering words broken by crying. "Isabella, my love, Mom misses you so much. Luke, my baby, forgive me for not being there with you." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. Isabella, Luke. He had never heard those names before. Valerie had never mentioned having children, never spoken of them in all those months of daily living. Curiosity and concern outweighed his sense of discretion, and without thinking too much, he gently pushed the door that wasn't locked. The scene he saw left him paralyzed, etching itself in his memory like a painful photograph he could never forget. Valerie was kneeling by her bed, dressed in her simple nightgown, holding a photograph to her chest with both hands rocking slightly while crying with an intensity that broke the soul. Her sobs were no longer contained now, flowing freely as if she no longer had the strength to keep holding that pain. Richard could see her lips trembling as she kissed the photograph over and over, murmuring names, asking for forgiveness, promising things he couldn't fully understand. Valerie kissed the photo one more time and brought it to her forehead, closing her eyes tightly as if trying to absorb the presence of those in the image. "Dear God, give me strength to go on another day," she whispered with a broken voice. "Help me be strong for them, even though my heart is breaking into pieces every night I spend without seeing them, without hugging them, without hearing their voices calling me Mom." Richard felt he was invading a deeply private moment, a sacred space of maternal pain that wasn't his to witness, but at the same time, he couldn't move. His own eyes began to fill with tears as he understood that during all these months, while Valerie cared for him with such dedication, while she smiled at him every morning, while she comforted him in his worst moments, she was carrying a monumental sadness hidden behind her professionalism and warmth. How was it possible that someone with so much personal pain could give so much love to another person? How could she care for him with such devotion when her own heart was clearly shattered by the absence of her children? Richard stepped back unintentionally, and the wooden floor creaked under his weight. The sound made Valerie turn her head sharply, startled her red and swollen eyes meeting Richard's gaze at the door. For a second time, seemed to stop. She hurried to hide the photograph behind her back, wiping her tears with the sleeves of her nightgown, trying to regain the composure she always maintained in front of him. "Mr. Richard, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you," I was stammering, clearly embarrassed at being discovered in that moment of extreme vulnerability. Richard raised a hand, gently stopping her. "Don't apologize, Valerie. I'm the one who should apologize for coming in without warning," he said with a trembling voice, still processing what he had just witnessed. He approached slowly and sat in the only chair in the room facing her, who was still kneeling by the bed. "Who are Isabella and Luke?" he asked with the gentlest voice he could find, knowing he was about to open a wound that Valerie had kept hidden for months. Valerie lowered her gaze, her hands trembling as she held the photograph to her chest again, debating internally if she should share her truth or continue guarding that secret that was consuming her inside every day. Richard waited in silence without pressuring her, giving her the space she needed to decide if she wanted to trust him. He could see the internal battle reflected on Valerie's face, the struggle between the desire to keep her private life separate from her work and the human need to share a pain that was already too heavy to carry alone. After what seemed like an eternity, Valerie raised her gaze and extended the photograph toward Richard with trembling hands. He took it carefully as if holding something sacred and observed it under the dim lamplight. In the image were two beautiful children, a girl about 9 years old with the same dark hair as Valerie and a smile that lit up the whole photograph, and a younger boy about 6 with big expressive eyes looking directly at the camera with pure innocence. Both were hugging happy, oblivious to the pain that photograph represented for the woman who had left them behind. "They're my children," Mr. Richard said Valerie finally, her voice barely a whisper loaded with guilt and love. "Isabella is 9 and Luke is 6. I left them back home 5 years ago." Richard looked up from the photograph and saw new tears rolling down Valerie's cheeks. Tears she didn't try to hide. Why, asked Richard, his voice breaking, feeling he was about to hear a story that would forever change how he saw the woman who had been caring for him all these months. Valerie took a deep breath as if preparing to relive the most painful moment of her life and began to speak with a broken voice. 5 years ago, Mr. Richard and I lived in a small town in rural Texas with my 2 children and my mom. My husband had died 2 years earlier in a farming accident, leaving me alone with 2 small kids and no money to feed them. I worked cleaning houses, washing others' laundry, doing whatever, but it wasn't enough. There were days when my children asked for food and I only had bread and beans to share among the 3 of us, and even that wasn't sufficient. I saw Isabella getting thinner every week. I heard Luke cry from hunger at night and felt like the worst mother in the world because I couldn't give them what they needed. She paused to wipe the tears falling uncontrollably, but continued speaking because it seemed that after so long holding that pain she needed to get it all out. One day a neighbor told me about jobs in the big cities like Los Angeles where they paid better wages, that with a month's work there I could send enough money to support my kids for a whole year. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought they were just stories, but desperation made me investigate more. I talked to other women from the town who had made the move, who had left their families behind to seek a better life, and they all told me the same. It's the most painful sacrifice you'll make in your life, but it's the only way to get your kids out of hunger. Richard listened in absolute silence, his heart shrinking with every word Valerie uttered. Understanding now the magnitude of the sacrifice this woman had made, Valerie continued, her voice becoming more intense as she relived those moments. I gathered every dollar I could save over months, sold the few jewels I had from my mom, borrowed from whoever could lend me, and scraped together just enough to pay for the trip across states. I told my mom I was going, that I needed to do this for Isabella and Luke, that it was the only way to give them a future. She cried, begged me not to, said we'd find another way, but I knew there wasn't. The night before leaving, I hugged my children while they slept and silently promised them I'd return, that this was temporary, that Mom was just going to work for a while and then come back. Isabella woke up while I was packing my clothes in a small bag. She looked at me with those big, confused eyes and asked, "Mommy, where are you going?" I didn't have the courage to tell her the truth. I lied, saying I was going to the city for work but would be back soon. She hugged me tight and made me promise to call every day. I promised. Valerie covered her face with her hands, sobbing intensely, reliving that farewell moment that had haunted her every day for 5 years. The journey was a nightmare, Mr. Richard. Days on buses, hitchhiking, dealing with uncertainty and fear. But all that was nothing compared to the pain of being away from my children. When I finally arrived in Los Angeles, I got jobs in houses, restaurants, anywhere that would take me without too many questions. Every dollar I earned, I sent home, leaving just the minimum to survive. I slept in shared rooms with other women in my situation, ate once a day to save more, worked double shifts whenever I could. I called them every week because I didn't have money to call daily as I'd promised Isabella, and each call was like stabbing a knife in my heart. I heard their voices asking when I'd return, saying they missed me. And I lied, promising soon, very soon. Though deep down I knew the money was never enough for tickets, for settling down, for coming back. Richard felt his own tears starting to roll down his cheeks. Never in his life had he felt so much respect and admiration for another person as in that moment. Valerie raised her gaze and saw him crying, and something in that gesture of genuine empathy gave her strength to continue. "It's been 5 years, Mr. Richard. 5 years since I last hugged my children. 5 years sending money so they could study, eat well, have clothes and shoes, but I never saved enough to go back. Every year that passes, I feel life slipping away." Isabella is now 9. She's no longer the little girl I left, and Luke is 6, and I've missed seeing him grow. I missed his first day of school. I missed all the important things a mother should be there for. I call them every Sunday religiously, and they tell me about school friends, how they're doing. But I feel they're getting used to living without me, that my mom is becoming their real mother while I'm just a distant voice on the phone sending money. My biggest fear, sir, isn't dying far from them. My biggest fear is that one day they'll look at me and no longer recognize me as their mom, that they'll think I abandoned them, that I didn't love them enough to stay. Valerie sobbed uncontrollably now, years of accumulated pain finally coming out after being held for so long. I sleep hugging this photo every night, kissing it as if I could feel them close, begging God to give me strength to work one more day, to send one more dollar, hoping that someday I can reunite with them. Richard got up from the chair with difficulty, his own emotions threatening to overflow, and knelt beside Valerie. Without a word, he hugged her like a father hugs a suffering daughter, and Valerie completely broke down in that hug, crying with an intensity that seemed to want to empty years of contained pain. "Valerie, you're not a bad mother," said Richard with a firm but emotional voice. "You're the bravest and most sacrificial mother I've ever known. You left everything you loved to give them a better chance at life. That's not abandonment. That's the greatest love there is. Your children may not understand now, but when they grow up, they'll comprehend the sacrifice you made for them." Valerie shook her head between sobs as if she couldn't accept those comforting words because the guilt she carried was too heavy. "But I left them, sir. A mother shouldn't leave her children. I failed at the most important thing." Richard held her tighter, feeling his own heart transform in that moment. All his life he had believed family was a biological concept, something inherited by blood. But now he understood that true family is built with sacrifice, unconditional love, with being present even when physical distance separates you. That night, Richard realized he had hired Valerie thinking she would care for him, but the truth was she had shown him the real meaning of love, and something deep changed inside him forever. After that night of confessions and shared tears, something fundamental changed in the dynamic between Richard and Valerie, though neither expressed it directly in words. Richard began to observe her with completely different eyes. He no longer saw the efficient employee who prepared his meals and reminded him of his medications, but a woman with an inner strength he had never possessed, not even in his best years. Every gesture of Valerie now had a deeper meaning for him. When she smiled in the mornings, Richard knew that behind that smile was a heart missing 2 children across the country. When she sang softly while cooking, he understood those songs were probably the same ones she sang to Isabella and Luke when they were smaller. When she folded clothes with such care, Richard imagined she was thinking of her children's clothes she couldn't fold. The admiration he felt for Valerie grew every day, transforming into something he had never experienced. A deep love, not romantic, but the kind of love that exists between people who recognize each other as soul family. Richard, who had been orphaned since 18 after losing his parents in a car accident, had never known what it meant to have someone genuinely care for him without expecting anything in return, and now, in the twilight of his life, he had finally found it. The days passed with a comforting routine, but loaded with meaning. Richard started doing things he hadn't before. He asked Valerie about her children every week. He wanted to know how they were doing in school, what they had said in the last phone call, if Isabella was still good at math, as Valerie had mentioned, if Luke still feared the dark. Valerie, surprised at first by that genuine interest, began to open up more, sharing anecdotes that made her laugh and cry at the same time. "Isabella told me last Sunday she wants to be a doctor when she grows up," said Valerie one day while preparing lunch, her eyes shining with maternal pride. "She says she wants to cure people like the doctors who helped her dad, though they couldn't save him." Richard felt a lump in the throat, hearing that, imagining that 9-year-old girl with such noble dreams despite losing her father and being separated from her mother. "She'll be an extraordinary doctor," replied Richard with conviction, "because she'll have her mother's heart." Valerie stopped cutting vegetables for a moment, turned to look at him with tears in her eyes, and murmured a thank you that came straight from her soul. In that instant, Richard made a silent but firm decision. If God gave him enough time, he would find a way to help Valerie reunite with her children, though he didn't yet know how. Sundays became the most important day of the week for both, because it was the day Valerie called home. Richard noticed she disappeared exactly at 10 in the morning when her children had already had breakfast and were available to talk, and returned about an hour later with red eyes but a smile on her face. One Sunday, Richard asked permission to be present during the call, and Valerie, after hesitating a few seconds, agreed. She dialed the number on the kitchen phone, that old rotary phone Richard had never changed because it reminded him of simpler times, and waited as the long-distance tones rang. When she heard her mother's voice on the other end, Valerie's face lit up completely. "Mom, it's me. How are you? Are the kids there?" Richard watched from the door, seeing how Valerie transformed in those moments, how her posture changed, how her voice became higher and maternal. Mommy Richard heard through the receiver the excited voice of a girl. Valerie closed her eyes, pressing the phone to her ear as if she could get physically closer to her daughter through that connection. "My love, my beautiful Isabella, how are you? How was school this week?" The conversation continued for several minutes. Valerie asking questions, laughing at the answers, giving advice, promising she'd send more money soon for the school supplies they needed. When it was Luke's turn, Richard saw tears begin to roll silently down Valerie's cheeks as she listened to her younger son's voice. "Mommy, when are you coming back? I miss you so much," said the childish voice with innocence that broke the heart. Valerie bit her lip to not sob audibly. She breathed deeply and replied with the firmest voice she could. "Soon, my love. Mom is working very hard to come back and be with you. Meanwhile, you have to behave with Grandma. Yes, study hard and take care of your sister." Luke promised he would. He told her about a drawing he had made of his family where he, Isabella, his grandma, and his mom appeared all together and smiling. "I have it taped to my bedroom wall to see you every night before sleeping," said the boy, and Valerie had to cover her mouth with her hand to muffle a sob. Richard felt his own heart break, witnessing that exchange, understanding that what he was seeing wasn't just a phone call, but the fragile thread keeping a family separated by need and circumstances together. When Valerie finally hung up after saying goodbye 1,000 times, she stayed there standing, holding onto the table edge, crying silently. Richard approached and simply put his hand on her shoulder without saying anything, because there were no words to ease that pain, only the supportive presence of someone who now understood the magnitude of her sacrifice. That afternoon, while Valerie rested in her room recovering emotionally from the call, Richard sat in his study and began doing numbers in an old notebook. He calculated how much time he had left according to medical forecasts, reviewed his financial statements, thought about his inheritance, which he had no one to leave to, no children, no siblings. His parents had died decades ago, and the few distant cousins never bothered to visit him once during his illness. For years, he had thought of donating his fortune to charities. But now, looking toward the room where Valerie rested, where this extraordinary woman cried every night hugging a photo of her children, Richard understood something with a clarity that shook him. Family wasn't just blood, not just last name, not just genetics. Family was Valerie, holding his hand in the early mornings when the pain was unbearable. It was Valerie cooking his meals with love even though she barely ate to save money and send it home. It was Valerie praying for him every night even though her own prayers should have focused on her problems. If anyone deserved to be called family, it was her. Richard closed the notebook with renewed determination, feeling for the first time in months that his life still had a purpose, that his money would finally have true meaning. He didn't know exactly how or when, but he had made a decision that would change everything. Valerie would hug her children again, and he would make sure that happened before it was too late. November arrived, bringing an unusual chill for Los Angeles and a reality Richard could no longer ignore. His body was giving up faster than the doctors had predicted. The chest pains were no longer just at night. Now, they attacked at any time of day without warning, leaving him breathless, forcing him to stop in the middle of simple activities like walking from his room to the bathroom or sitting down to breakfast. His legs swelled more and more, a sign his heart no longer pumped blood properly. And there were mornings he woke feeling every breath required conscious, exhausting effort. Dr. Rivera, his trusted cardiologist for over 10 years, had been brutally honest during the last visit. "Richard, your heart is failing. We can do what we can to keep you comfortable, but you need to prepare. We're talking weeks, maybe a couple of months if you're lucky." Richard had received the news with a calm that surprised the doctor, but the truth was he already knew. His body had been screaming that reality every day. What hurt him most wasn't the idea of dying, because at 61, and after living a life full of professional achievements, though empty personally, he had made peace with his mortality, but the idea of dying before fulfilling the silent promise he had made to Valerie before seeing her reunited with Isabella and Luke. Valerie noticed the deterioration immediately. It was impossible not to. Richard now needed help climbing stairs. His appetite had decreased drastically despite her preparing his favorite dishes to tempt him to eat, and his skin had taken on a worrisome pallor that didn't go away even with the California sun. Without Richard asking, Valerie decided to temporarily move to the guest room right next to his master bedroom, arguing she could respond faster if he needed her at night. "You don't have to do that." "Valerie, you already do too much for me," protested Richard weakly. But she simply shook her head with that soft but firm determination that characterized her. "You've given me so much, Mr. Richard, more than you imagine. You've listened to me, treated me with respect, made me feel my sacrifice is worth it. It's the least I can do." She didn't say it out loud, but both knew she was preparing for the inevitable, that those weeks or months left for Richard would be the last they shared. And Valerie wanted to ensure he didn't spend a single moment alone and scared. The nights became harder as the illness advanced mercilessly. Richard woke almost every hour with sharp chest pains that stole his breath, feeling like an enormous weight was crushing him, like air didn't want to enter his lungs no matter how hard he tried. In those moments of anguish and fear, when the room's darkness seemed to close in on him and the terror of dying alone invaded him, he heard soft footsteps approaching the door. Opening carefully, and Valerie appeared like an angel, sent exactly at the right moment. She never arrived in a hurry or annoyed at being woken. She always entered calmly, turned on the small night lamp, creating a soft, comforting light, and sat in the chair by his bed without speaking at first, just being present. Then, with delicate movements, she took Richard's hand in hers, those hard-working hands that had cleaned thousands of homes, but now offered the purest comfort he had known. "Breathe with me, Mr. Richard," she whispered calmly. "Inhale, slowly count to 4. Now exhale. That's it, very good." She guided him through the pain with infinite patience, spoke to him softly about everyday things to distract his mind from the suffering, told him about the flowers she saw blooming in the garden, about the neighbor's cat that strolled on the fence every afternoon, about the new recipe she wanted to try for him tomorrow. But what comforted Richard most were the prayers Valerie made in those dark, early mornings. Simple prayers, but full of genuine faith coming straight from her heart. "Good God," she said with closed eyes, holding Richard's hand. "I thank you for this day you gave us, for the chance to care for this good man who has suffered so much. I ask you to ease his pain, give him peace in his heart, allow him to rest tonight. Help me be strong for him. Give me the right words to comfort him. Guide my hands to serve him better. Thank you for putting him in my path, for giving me the chance to give back even a little, all the goodness in this world." Richard listened to every word with tears rolling silently down his temples. He had never been religious. He had spent his life believing only in the tangible, in business and investments. But hearing Valerie talk to God like conversing with a close friend gave him a peace no medicine had achieved. He didn't know if God existed or not, but he knew that if he did, he surely resembled Valerie, compassionate, sacrificial, capable of loving unconditionally. After the prayers, Valerie stayed there, sitting sometimes, humming soft songs Richard had never heard but assumed were lullabies she sang to her children, sometimes just in silence, holding his hand until the pain subsided and he managed to fall asleep again. One particularly difficult early morning in mid-November, when the pain was so intense, Richard thought it would be his last, when he felt his heart literally giving up and the most primitive fear took over him. Valerie held his face in her hands with maternal tenderness that made him cry like a child. "Don't go yet, Mr. Richard," she begged with tears in her own eyes. "Stay a little longer with me. Breathe. Focus on my voice. You're not alone. I'm here with you." Richard, between gasps and tears, managed to whisper the words he had wanted to say for weeks. No one has ever cared for me like this, like you do. Why are you so good to me?" Valerie smiled through her tears, caressed Richard's white hair with infinite delicacy, and replied with devastating honesty, "Because you remind me of the father I lost, Mr. Richard. My dad died in my arms, just like you are now fighting for every breath, and I couldn't save him. But I can be here for you. I can make sure you don't feel alone. I can give you the love and care my father had in his last days, and that we all deserve when our time comes." Richard sobbed openly, hugging Valerie like a son hugs his mother, finally understanding why the universe had put this extraordinary woman in his path just when he needed her most. In that moment of absolute vulnerability and deep connection, Richard knew with certainty that no matter how much life he had left, he would use every second to ensure Valerie got everything she deserved. And as the pain finally subsided and he fell asleep, feeling the reassuring beat of Valerie's heart near his, an idea began to form in his mind, a plan that would require discretion time and all the determination he had left. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video and prepare your heart. The morning of November 22nd dawned with a gray sky threatening rain, and Richard woke feeling something different inside, a mental clarity he hadn't experienced in weeks despite the constant pain gnawing at his body. He had spent the whole night awake, not from physical suffering this time, but from the excitement of what he was about to do, from the decision he had made that would change Valerie's life forever. During the last 3 weeks, while she cared for him with that unwavering devotion, Richard had been secretly working on a plan that required every ounce of energy left and the discreet help of trusted people. He had contacted Robert Mendez, his personal lawyer, for over 20 years, a serious and efficient man who never asked unnecessary questions and executed instructions to the letter. He had given him specific orders. He needed to find Valerie's family back in Texas, needed to start all legal procedures to bring them to Los Angeles safely and legally. Needed everything done with the utmost discretion because this had to be a surprise. Robert had accepted the assignment without hesitation, recognizing in Richard's eyes a determination that allowed no delays or excuses, and got to work immediately with the urgency the case required. The process had been more complicated than Richard initially imagined, but money and the right connections miraculously sped up procedures that normally would take years. Robert had traveled personally to rural Texas with a private investigator. They located Valerie's town using the limited information Richard could provide without raising suspicions. They found the humble house where Valerie's mother lived with Isabella and Luke and started delicate conversations with the lady who at first distrusted these strangers arriving, asking about her daughter, and offering things that sounded too good to be true. It was necessary for Robert to call Richard directly from Texas so he could speak on the phone with Valerie's mother, explaining who he was, how much he admired her daughter, and exactly what he wanted to do for them. The lady, a 62-year-old woman named Mary, had cried throughout the conversation, unable to believe that after 5 years of painful separation, a stranger, Millionaire, was offering to reunite her family without asking for anything in return. "Why are you doing this for us?" she had asked with a trembling voice. Richard had replied with total honesty, "Because your daughter has given me something all my money could never buy. She's given me love, company, and dignity in my last days. This is the least I can do for her." Mary had accepted between sobs, promising to keep the secret until Richard decided to reveal it. The relocation arrangements had been a bureaucratic maze of papers, translations, certificates, interviews, and permits that Richard never could have navigated without professional help and substantial financial resources. Robert had hired the best relocation specialist in Los Angeles, a man who knew every legal loophole, and motivated by the generous payment Richard offered and the emotional nature of the case, worked tirelessly to arrange travel visas and support if needed. They needed to prove family ties, obtain original birth certificates, conduct full medical exams for the 3 family members, demonstrate. Richard had the financial resources to support them without burden, and fill mountains of forms that seemed designed to discourage anyone trying. Every day that passed, Richard felt anxiety growing in his chest along with his illness pain, fearing his body would give up before seeing Valerie reunited with her kids. But his will was stronger than his weak heart. Finally, after 3 weeks of intense work, constant calls, legal expedites to speed processes, and intervention from business contacts Richard had cultivated over years, Robert called with the news Richard had desperately awaited. The arrangements were approved, tickets bought, and the family would arrive in Los Angeles in exactly 3 days. That afternoon of November 22nd, while Valerie was at the market buying dinner ingredients, Richard gathered all his strength to make one more call, this time directly to Texas to the phone number Robert had provided. Mary answered on the second ring, her voice anxious, revealing she had been waiting by the phone. "Mr. Richard." Richard smiled despite the pain pulsing in his chest. "Mrs. Mary, it's time to prepare. In 3 days, you, Isabella, and Luke will fly to Los Angeles. Robert will explain all details, give you the tickets, ensure you arrive safe. When you land here, I'll take care of the rest. I only ask one thing. When you see Valerie, tell her how much you love her. Tell her you understood why she had to leave. Tell her you never stopped waiting for her." Mary sobbed on the other end, thanking him over and over with words barely understandable between her tears. "God will bless you, Mr. Richard. God will receive you with open arms in heaven for what you're doing for my daughter and grandchildren." Richard felt his own eyes moisten not from sadness but from a deep joy he hadn't felt his whole life. "I'm just returning a little of the love your daughter has given me, Mrs. Mary. See you in 3 days." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied, knowing he had achieved something more important than any business deal he had closed in his life. November 25th arrived, a day Richard had marked on the calendar in advance, a day he had waited for with a mix of excitement and terror because he didn't know if his body would hold until seeing it come. He had planned everything meticulously with Robert. The flight for Mary, Isabella, and Luke would land at Los Angeles International Airport at 3 p.m. Robert would pick them up personally and bring them straight to the mansion, and Richard would ensure Valerie was at home when they arrived with no idea what was about to happen. That morning, Richard asked Valerie not to go out anywhere because he needed to talk to her about something important. And she worried it was bad news about his health, agreed immediately, staying nervous in the kitchen baking cookies to keep her hands busy. Outside, the sky had started to cloud and a light rain began to fall, tapping softly against the mansion windows, and creating an almost cinematic atmosphere for what was about to occur. Richard sat in the main living room from where he could see the front entrance, his heart beating erratically, not from illness but from pure anticipation, checking the clock every 5 minutes, waiting for the moment that would change everything. At 4:15 p.m., exactly when Robert had promised, Richard heard a car stopping in front of the house and knew the most important moment of his last months had arrived. He called Valerie with a voice trembling from emotion, and when she appeared wiping her hands on her apron with a worried expression, he simply said, "Valerie, there's someone here to see you." And the rain outside seemed to intensify as if the sky itself knew it was about to witness a miracle. Valerie looked at Richard with confusion, her mind trying to process who could be visiting her at the house where she worked because in 5 years living in Los Angeles she hadn't made close friends. She had dedicated every free moment to working or saving money, and no one knew her address except the employment agency that had hired her originally. "Someone for me, Mr. Richard, there must be a mistake. I don't know anyone here who would come visit me," she said with an unsure voice, drying her hands on the apron from nervousness. Richard simply smiled, a mysterious smile loaded with contained emotion, and pointed toward the front door with a gesture of his trembling hand. "Go open the door, Valerie. Trust me." She walked slowly to the entrance, her heart starting to beat faster, without understanding why, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation she couldn't explain. When she put her hand on the doorknob and opened it, the falling rain outside created a curtain of water that for a second prevented her from clearly seeing who was standing under the porch roof. Then, when her vision cleared and she could finally distinguish the figures in front of her, the whole world seemed to stop dead time, freezing in that impossible instant where dreams and reality collide head-on. There they were, Isabella no longer the 4-year-old girl she had left, but a 9-year-old preteen with long dark hair in 2 braids with huge eyes that filled with tears instantly upon seeing her mother with her body trembling from emotion contained for 5 years of waiting. Luke, the baby, she had left barely walking, and who now was a 6-year-old boy with his late father's smile, with new shoes that Mary had surely bought especially for this trip, with a small backpack hanging from his shoulders and tears already rolling down his cheeks before anyone said a single word. And behind them, holding them by the shoulders with her wrinkled but firm hands, was Mary Valerie's mother, a woman who had aged noticeably in these 5 years, carrying the responsibility of raising her grandchildren, while her only daughter was thousands of miles away with a face furrowed by deep wrinkles but eyes shining with pure happiness at seeing her daughter again. The 4 stayed motionless for an eternal second, as if none could believe this was really happening, as if they feared a single movement would break the spell, and they'd discover it was just a cruel dream. It was Isabella who broke the silence first. "Mommy, Her voice came out as a broken whisper loaded with 5 years of unanswered questions of birthdays celebrated without her, of important moments where her mother should have been present but wasn't. That single word Mommy pronounced with a mix of disbelief, hope, and accumulated love was enough to break Valerie's paralysis. A guttural sound came from her throat, something between a scream and a sob. A sound only a heart broken 1,000 times and finally being rebuilt piece by piece can produce. Her legs failed. Her knees hit the marble porch floor without her feeling any pain, and her arms opened completely in a universal motherly gesture, waiting to receive her children. Isabella, Luke. My babies. My loves. You're here. You're really here, she cried with a voice that was pure distilled emotion, unable to control the tears now falling like waterfalls down her face. Isabella and Luke ran to her simultaneously, their small bodies crashing into Valerie's with a force that almost knocked her back, and the three fell into a collective embrace where you could no longer tell where one ended and another began, where 5 years of separation were compressing into a single infinite moment. Valerie hugged them with almost desperate force, as if afraid that if she let go, they'd disappear like ghosts. She kissed their heads nonstop, inhaled the scent of their hair mixed with the rain, touched their faces with the trembling hands to confirm they were real and not her exhausted imagination's product. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Forgive me for leaving you. Forgive me for not being there. I love you. I love you more than my own life. Every day without you was like dying a little, but everything I did was for you to give you a better future. She sobbed uncontrollably. The words coming out rushed between tears she had held for exactly 1826 days. Isabella, old enough to understand her mother's sacrifice, hugged Valerie with her thin but surprisingly strong arms and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, Mommy. I always knew you loved us. I told Luke every night you were working for us that you'd come back when you could. I never stopped believing in you." Luke stuck to his mother's chest as if wanting to merge with her, just repeated over and over, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," unable to form more complex sentences because his 6-year-old brain couldn't process the magnitude of what he was living. Mary approached then, her own tears mixing with the falling rain, and knelt beside her daughter and grandchildren, enveloping the three in a bigger hug, creating a family circle that had been broken for too long and was finally closing again. From the living room, Richard watched the scene with tears rolling freely down his wrinkled face, feeling witness to something sacred, to a love so pure and true that made all his material riches seem absolutely insignificant in comparison. He could see his own sacrifices reflected in that reunion, the secret calls he had made when Valerie wasn't around, the money he had spent without thinking twice. The sleepless nights worrying his body would give up before seeing this moment. But seeing her there, Valerie crying from pure happiness while hugging her children after 5 years of forced separation, confirmed every effort had been worth it, that his life had finally served something greater than accumulating money in bank accounts. Robert, who had brought the family from the airport, stood beside Richard with moist eyes too, because even he, a hardened lawyer who had handled bitter divorces and million-dollar disputes for decades, recognized he was witnessing something extraordinary. After several eternal minutes where time seemed not to exist, Valerie finally looked up. Still holding her children to her chest, and looked directly at Richard through her tears, her expression showing gratitude so deep that words could never express it adequately. Richard simply nodded, smiling through his own tears, and murmured the only words that mattered, "Welcome home." In that moment, as the rain began to let up outside and a sun ray pierced the clouds, creating a faint rainbow over Los Angeles, Richard knew he could die in peace because he had achieved something no million-dollar business had ever given him. He had created a family not of blood, but of pure love and mutual sacrifice. But his work wasn't finished yet, because there was one last decision to make, one last act of love that would ensure this family he had helped reunite would never separate again. And for that, he needed to act fast before his heart finally gave up. The days after the reunion were like living in a dream no one wanted to wake from. The mansion, which for months had been a silent place inhabited only by a sick man and his devoted employee, now overflowed with life, with Isabella and Luke's laughter running through the halls, with conversations between Valerie and her mother in the kitchen while preparing traditional American comfort food like meatloaf and apple pie that filled the whole house with home aromas, with the pure energy only children can bring to a space. Richard watched everything from his favorite chair in the living room, smiling despite the pain that never left him. feeling these last days of his life finally had the meaning he had sought for decades. Valerie cared for him as always, but now did it with a different light in her eyes, a happiness radiating from her whole being that made even the most mundane tasks seem like celebrations. Isabella and Luke had quickly adopted Richard as the grandfather they never had sitting beside him to tell about their life back home, showing him their drawings, asking him to tell stories from when he was young. But Richard knew time was running out faster than anticipated. His body sent unequivocal signals. The pains were more frequent and intense. Breathing required more conscious effort, and there were moments he felt his heart simply skipping several beats before continuing to work painfully. 2 days after Valerie's family arrived, taking advantage of a moment when she had gone out with the children and her mother to the nearby park to see the neighborhood, Richard called Robert again to his private study. "I need you to bring the final documents," he said without preamble, his voice weakened but firm in determination. "I want to sign my will now. We can't wait anymore. My heart is warning me I don't have much time." Robert, who had worked with Richard enough years to recognize when there was no room for arguments, nodded solemnly and promised to bring everything necessary the next day with a certified notary to make the process completely legal and indisputable. The next day, while Valerie entertained her children showing them the mansion's garden, Richard signed the documents that would change that family's future forever. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote his name on each page the notary indicated, but his mind was completely clear about what he was doing and why. He left everything to Valerie: the mansion, bank accounts, investments, bonds, properties, absolutely everything he had accumulated during his life of tireless work. Robert had tried to suggest leaving something for charity to keep some diversification, but Richard had been inflexible. "Valerie is my charity, Robert. She's the only person in this world who deserves every cent I have. She'll ensure her children's study, her mother has a dignified old age, and I know she'll also help others because that's the kind of person she is." When he finished signing the last page, Richard leaned back in his chair, exhausted but at peace, knowing he had closed the last pending circle of his life. The night of November 28th. Richard woke with a different pain, deeper and more definitive than all previous. He knew his time had come. He felt it in every cell of his body shutting down slowly, like lights turning off one by one. With the little strength left, he rang the small bell Valerie had left on his nightstand for emergencies. She arrived in seconds. Still in her nightgown, with loose hair and eyes immediately alert, seeing the extreme pallor on Richard's face. "Mr. Richard, I'm calling the ambulance," she said with a trembling voice, but he raised his hand gently, stopping her. "No, Valerie. I don't want to die in a cold hospital surrounded by strangers. I want to stay here with you in this place that finally felt like home." Valerie felt tears start rolling down her cheeks, understanding what Richard was telling her without words. She sat on the bed beside him, took his hand in hers, and simply was present as she had been so many nights before. "Thank you," whispered Richard, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for giving me a family in my last months. Thank you for teaching me what true love means. Thank you for caring for me when no one else did." Valerie sobbed openly now, gently squeezing Richard's hand. "No, Mr. Richard, thank you for bringing back my children, for giving me the chance to be a mother again, for always treating me with dignity and respect. You changed our lives forever." Richard smiled weakly, feeling his body beginning to give up finally after fighting so long. "Take good care of Isabella and Luke. Teach them about sacrifice, about love, about kindness. And always remember that family isn't just blood, it's who is present when most needed." Those were his last words. At 3:27 a.m. on November 29, 1995, Richard closed his eyes for the last time, holding Valerie's hand, dying in peace, surrounded by the love he had helped reunite. Valerie stayed there holding him for hours, crying silently while thanking him over and over, until dawn began filtering through the windows, announcing a new day Richard would no longer see. Richard's funeral was a simple but dignified ceremony, attended mainly by business colleagues who had known him superficially but hadn't really shared his life. Valerie, dressed all in black and supported by her mother on one side and Isabella on the other, cried with a deep sadness beyond losing an employer. It was the sadness of having lost someone who had become family in the purest sense of the word. Luke, confused by the whole situation and too young to fully understand death, stayed close to his mom, asking softly when Mr. Richard would wake up. After the service, when everyone had left, Robert approached Valerie with a thick manila envelope in his hands. Mrs. Valerie Richard left specific instructions to read this today after the funeral. Could we talk in private? Valerie nodded, her heart beating with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, without imagining what she was about to discover. They met in Robert's office in downtown Los Angeles, a professional space with shelves full of legal books and diplomas on the walls. Mary had stayed at the mansion caring for the children, giving Valerie space to handle Richard's final affairs. Robert asked her to sit, his expression serious but with a glint of contained emotion in his eyes that Valerie couldn't interpret. He opened the envelope and took out several documents along with a handwritten letter in Richard's trembling but legible handwriting. Before reading the letter, a need to officially explain Richard's will content began Robert adjusting his glasses. Richard has left his entire inheritance without exceptions to you and your children, Isabella and Luke. The silence that followed was absolute. Valerie looked at him without understanding, as if the words had been spoken in a language she didn't recognize. "Excuse me," she managed to articulate finally, her voice barely a whisper. Robert continued with a professional but gentle voice, explaining the inexplicable. "The mansion where you're living now, valued at $3 million, is now your property. The bank accounts totaling approximately $5 million are in your name. The investments in bonds and stocks, another $2 million approximately, are also yours. In total, you're inheriting an estate of about $10 million plus additional properties generating monthly passive income." Valerie felt the world spinning around her, that this couldn't be real, that any moment she'd wake and discover it was a cruel dream. "No, this is a mistake. I was just his employee. I can't accept this. There must be relatives, someone else who should receive this," she stammered, tears starting to fall again. Robert shook his head gently. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Valerie. Richard was very clear. He has no living relatives, and you were the only person who cared for him with genuine love in his last months. Now, allow me to read the letter he wrote for you." Robert unfolded the letter carefully and began reading with a clear but emotional voice. "Dear Valerie, if you're hearing this, it means I've already left this world and finally found peace. I want you to know that the last months of my life, thanks to you, were the happiest I've lived. For decades, I built a business empire, accumulated more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, but I never understood what it was all for until I met you. You taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in acts of love, silent sacrifices, being present for someone without expecting anything back. You showed me what family means, not the one inherited by blood, but the one built with care and respect. Valerie, family isn't just blood, it's who shows love with actions. It's who cares without wanting anything in return. It's who sacrifices for pure love. You did all that for me when you had no obligation to. That's why everything I have is now yours." Valerie sobbed inconsolably, covering her face with her hands, unable to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. Robert continued reading, his own voice breaking slightly. "Use this money to give Isabella and Luke the education they deserve, to ensure your mother has a comfortable and dignified old age, to never have to separate from them again. Build the life you always dreamed of, but fate had denied you. And when your children grow up and ask why they have all this, tell them this story. Teach them that true love transcends death, that kindness is always rewarded even if not sought, and that family is built with the heart and not just blood. Thank you for giving me a family in my last days, Valerie. May God bless you and your children always, with all my love and gratitude, Richard." When Robert finished reading, he kept respectful silence, allowing Valerie to process everything. She cried with a mix of sadness for the loss and awe at the incomprehensible gift Richard had left her. After several minutes, she managed to speak between sobs. "He saved us, gave us everything without asking anything, and I'll never be able to thank him enough." Robert nodded understandingly. "I think the best way to thank him is to live the life he wanted you to have, Mrs. Valerie, and honor his memory by being the extraordinary mother you already are." The years passed, and Valerie built exactly the life Richard had dreamed for her. Isabella graduated with honors from high school and entered university to study medicine, fulfilling the dream she had shared with her mom years ago of becoming a doctor to help others. Luke, who discovered a natural talent for numbers and business, studied administration, intending to learn to responsibly manage the inheritance Richard had left them. Mary lived her last years in peace, surrounded by her reunited family, watching her grandchildren grow in a house full of love and opportunities. Valerie never worked as a housekeeper again, but neither forgot her roots nor where she came from. She used part of the money to discreetly help other struggling families in similar situations, funding education, reuniting loved ones, giving opportunities where before there was only desperation. In the main living room of the mansion, Valerie had a portrait of Richard made that she hung in the most visible place, and every night before sleeping she stood in front of it with Isabella and Luke, already adults, and thanked him silently for changing their lives. The story of Richard and Valerie became a legend in their community. A powerful reminder that true love knows no boundaries, that family is built with sacrifice and dedication, and that acts of kindness can transcend even death itself, continuing their impact generation after generation. If this story moved you as much as it did me telling it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Because here we share stories that prove love and kindness still exist in this world. Remember, you never know when a simple act of kindness can change someone's life forever. True family isn't chosen by blood. It's built with the heart, with daily actions, with the unconditional love we give without expecting anything back. May God bless your path and give you the strength to be like Valerie, who loved without limits, and like Richard, who knew how to recognize and reward that pure love. May you never lack the capacity to see blessings disguised as people who come into your life when you need them most. Amen.